Hi everyone, and welcome to the Love of Wisdom Book Club. I'm joined once again by my brother Thomas Carling to discuss Chasing the Scream by Johann Harri, a book about the war on drugs, addiction, and everyone involved, and getting different perspectives on that. This was a really enjoyable conversation. I really enjoyed the book. This is the second time I've read it, but the conversation was enjoyable for me for more reasons than just the book, because for those of you who've been following closely and watching the other episodes that I've done with my brother, I felt like in this one he was better prepared and more able to challenge me. There was situations where he had statistics to hand that I didn't, and I really appreciated that challenge and that opportunity to reflect on and grow from my own perspectives. So whether or not it's having the same impact on the audience is up for you to decide, but that is, to me, an indication that I'm achieving what I'm aiming for with this podcast, which is for me to grow intellectually and for the guests to grow intellectually, and hopefully for you to come on that journey with us. I hope you enjoy this episode. Chasing the Scream, what did you think of it?
Yeah, it was a very interesting book. I feel like there was a lot of stuff that sort of already, I don't know, already sort of subconsciously knew, but then like it just added and added to it. So it was quite an interesting look on it, especially around looking at like Portugal and Switzerland and how they handled the drug problem. Yeah, it was an interesting read. It's probably one of my favorite books in the last few months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good sign. That's always promising. So, this is the first time you've read it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Just because I read it probably about 6, 7 years ago the first time, and so this was a second reading for me. Um, but yeah, so you sort of feel like it helped you to formulate things you'd already been thinking of.
Yeah.
Well, did it add anything to what you'd already been thinking of?
I mean, it clarified a lot of how the drug war started. I never actually really even contemplated how it started or why it started. It just sort of like, obviously, since I've been born, like drugs have just been illegal, and there's been a massive issue around basically drug use and crime rate and things like that. Um, it it never really crossed my mind that race would be a factor into how or why it sort of got pushed and started. And it also didn't really cross my mind that people were using like uh, basically small doses of things like heroin and or well, morphine in getting it prescribed like over the counter and things like that. And like everyone was sort of using drugs in these small minuscule kind of ways on a daily life, and it was sort of everything was sort of fine until the drug war got pushed. And yeah, it was very interesting to see how it sort of developed from the early 1900s, basically.
Yeah, it was interesting to get some of the history of the drug war from it, but that's something. I mean, even that thing about people getting prescribed opiate-derived drugs over the counter is something that I've been aware of for a long time, because people speak about like the opioid crisis, particularly in America, where in lots of the industrial towns where sort of industry has suffered, you have high rates of addiction, usually to over-the-counter meds, and people because they were prescribed for people with physical pain. And quite often, once they end the prescription, people will
move on to illegal opioids such as heroin because it's cheaper and easier to obtain than, say, oxytocin, not oxytocin, oxycodone.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things that was always interesting to me is that I've known a lot of drug users through my time, and only a small percentage of them have ever become addicts, regardless of the drug that they're using. Admittedly, those who have tried heroin there tends to be much higher rates of addiction amongst them.
Yeah.
But largely, it has appeared to me that most people use substances through experimentation and curiosity, and it's a recreational habit, and then it's a small percentage of those who become addicts,
Yeah.
which is sort of what the statistics in the book were showing largely. Um, what did you make of the history he provided for the drug war?
And well, to be fair, like in all honesty, a lot of it was the first time I heard of any of it, so I don't really have anything to compare it to. And I found it quite interesting, especially how America sort of pushed this drug war and then sort of enforced it on like European countries and basically South America and stuff like that. They really pushed it. Um, and almost threatened that if they don't join in on this drug war like all around the world, then America won't be doing like business with them and so on and so forth. And so yeah, I found it quite fascinating really that it was such a I always assumed that the drug war was just a drug war with like everyone just sort of like all these countries was like, oh, drugs are bad because like and everyone was a lot more conservative. But that's a massive generalization across the whole world. But you know what I mean? It's sort of always assumed that just different countries started their own drug wars. As drugs became more profitable, these different cartels and like mafia and stuff like that all sort of sprung up in these different areas, and it was sort of individually sort of done, but in reality, it was massively pushed by America. And what's his name? Harry Anslinger. How do you pronounce it?
Anslinger, I don't know if it's Anslinger or Anslinger. I'm not sure how you'd pronounce it. I'm assuming it's Anslinger.
Yeah, yeah. I found that quite interesting, and the methods he used around it, like publishing fake stories around drug use of minorities and sort of playing on the fear of basically the underlying fear that was already spread across America that Mexicans were coming over here and taking our jobs and stuff like that. And now they're just like, oh, they're also coming over here with their marijuana and all these other things, and basically going to ruin our lives by becoming these superhuman drug addicts that can survive multiple gunshots and so on and so forth. It's obviously there's always been a lot of propaganda around drugs, well, since the start of the drug war, I suppose. But yeah, it kind of surprised me that the lengths of that certain people sort of went to um, ensure that there was enough there to drive the drug war in their favor, so they can get funding uh, and also the fact that plenty of the I say plenty in the book they say that some of the people who worked for Harry basically uh, there was evidence to show that they were being paid by the mafia to uh, do certain things to ensure that the drug war was going full swing so they could make more money off selling drugs illegally.
Yeah, well, this is, I guess to me, this has always been the most evident issue with the criminalization of drugs is that when you make something illegal, that something, I mean, it happened with prohibition. And I thought it was really useful that he drew that comparison. And I don't know if you've ever seen the TV series Boardwalk Empire, but that's it's a very good series with Steve Buscemi as one of the main characters, and it basically starts from the day of Prohibition, and it's about politicians and gangsters and how they navigate and build the illegal alcohol trade. And it includes people like Arnold Rothstein, who gets quite a mention in the book as well. So I feel like that the period of Prohibition gives a really good condensed look into the impact of the criminalization of drugs. So basically, laws work to an extent, but only to an extent.
Yeah.
So, most people who commit murder regardless of the fact that it's illegal, either because they believe they can get away with it or because they're not considering that in the moment. But having a law against murder probably acts as sufficient deterrent for a certain percentage of the population and allows us to inflict consequences on those who commit murder, or not, but also to those consequences give us a form of protection from further instances, because the presumption is that someone who murders is more likely to murder again than someone who hasn't murdered previously. But the criminalization of something that, and the reason I'm using murder as an example is because murder is probably one of those things that would be most universally considered to be immoral and wrong, and most people would support the criminalization of murder. Not everyone, obviously, but that using I guess it sort of functions as a limit case to be like, here's something extreme. And so when it comes to drugs, I think, and I want, because you obviously have known plenty of drug users through your time as well, so I would like to know what your reading of this situation is. I think there are a certain number of people who are attracted and interested in drugs because they're illegal, and we'll do them as a form of experimentation because they think it's part of a sort of rebellion, likely in their teenage years, to sort of be like, oh, look at me, I'm doing something naughty. There's like an element of that there.
Yeah.
There's a probably more substantial number of people who are just curious and don't really consider the fact that they're legal or illegal to be of any consequence, because they are available and part of the culture, and therefore the law itself doesn't have any bearing on their decision making. And there are equally probably a number of people who might have curiosities but wouldn't do them for fear of getting in trouble because of them being illegal. And then there's obviously a fourth group of people who have no interest in them and wouldn't do them regardless. And they probably make up the majority of people.
Would you say majority though? Because like obviously weed's illegal, and I'd say like maybe this is just biased because of my circles, but I would say like a majority of people this day and age in the UK have probably smoked weed at least like once.
To say I've tried once, I don't really know the statistics, but because I remember thinking this, because some of the areas I've lived in over the years, cannabis use has been much higher than others. But I looked at statistics for this, and I was surprised to find that it was only like 10% of people smoked weed or something like that. And I thought it was likely to be much higher. But then I was thinking about it and I was like, well, there probably is a bias in the sample that I'm experiencing because the areas that I've lived and the people that I know. And when you consider sort of working professionals, when you consider religious groups, when you consider retirees and older people, when you consider the percentage of the population that are so young they haven't had an opportunity to or wouldn't consider it, then it very quickly, I can very easily see how it would how it'd be very low, the number of people who actually use it, even if I'm exposed to a larger number of those than would be representative of the entire population.
Yeah. So I suppose as well, like a lot of people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s had a very different upbringing as well. So like they were probably much more prone to being told that drugs are dangerous, drugs are bad, compared to like this day and age. Yeah, I'd say if you like sort of wiped out all those people and wiped out the people that below the age of 16 or whatever, the statistics would probably be a lot higher. But like
yeah, you could do that with any statistics. If you get rid of the people that don't suit what I'm trying to say, then the statistics favour my argument much more.
Yeah, that's the best way to look at statistics, mate. Did you not know that?
Yeah. So do you think that my groupings of people and their relation to drugs and the legal status of drugs is fairly accurate, though, of representing the types of people you get?
I mean, I would say it's pretty much the only way of doing it. People who, yeah, pretty much, because I don't know. I think, in my personal experience, I think a lot of people that I know, more like the popular people in my school, who when they took drugs, it was more like, oh, I smoked weed, like I've done something illegal. I was drinking at the age of 14, whatever. And then there's just like a lot of my mates who are just like, yeah, I just fucking love getting stoned, basically. And then, like, to be fair, I didn't actually know that many people in my year that were just like, nah, I'm never trying drugs. Like, drugs are bad. Um, Even like a lot of the nerds, nerds probably like a bit of a rude way to put them, but the people that you wouldn't expect to be taking drugs, like I'd go to like house parties and they'd all be like smoking weed and stuff like that. So yeah.
So yeah, because I would say there's a cultural element to that, particularly in school, and it depends where you are, but I think you quite often get, there is social credit given for being a bit of a bit of a rebel, or a bit sort of pushing the boundaries and being willing to sort of do something out of the regular. It makes you stand out from the crowd a bit when you're in school. And but there's limits to that, because you don't want to go too far from the realms of how other people behave, because then you highlight yourself in a negative way. But I think there is an incentive there for certain people to gain social status through unconventional behavior. And but then what you get is, because that incentive exists, there's more than one person who wants to do it. It's not just one person does it. But then if you get enough of the popular kids, or enough kids gain popularity from doing it, you have then got an increased incentive for everyone else to do it, because they're like, well, that person smoked weed and became popular. And but it's not just that sort of status thing as well, because it's like, well, look at all those kids, they're having fun, and I want to do that as well. And I suspect that it's very I suspect there's a huge element of social contagion to it. Like, I bet it emerges in peer group. I bet if you looked at, and I don't know if this research has been done, and I'd like to know if it has, but I bet if you looked at first age of using cannabis, for example, and then looked at any patterns in emergence across the country, I bet you would get clusters by peer group where people and year groups where you might have a certain combination of people in one year where the rates of cannabis use are much lower at 16, say. And then if you looked at another year group um, who would have been 16, say, the year before or the year after, then their rates of cannabis use might have been much higher. Because I suspect there's like a cascading element where when a certain like a tipping point, you know, once a certain number of people use cannabis or other recreational drugs, then the probability of the other people within that social environment using them at that age, when people are particularly susceptible to peer influence, that they would the probability of them using as well increases substantially.
Yeah, well, that's just, I'd say that's basically just inherent in human nature because it's people wanting to fit in, essentially. I don't even know if it's sort of people looking and be like, oh, they're having fun. I think there is probably an element of FOMO, basically fear of missing out, but I think it's mainly the fact that humans are very dependent on their social status like throughout their life, and especially in teenagers, that is when you're trying to figure out like who you are, where you stand in social groups and stuff like that. And people are always trying to fight their way to the top of these social groups. In like obviously it's more apparent in some teenagers than others, but it's definitely apparent in a lot of them, and they're all just like trying to outdo each other or trying to make sure they're doing the in thing so they don't fall out of the basically criteria of being socially acceptable, pretty much.
Well, I know that from the sort of the research on personality in relation to influences on personality development, the twin studies that have been done show that the majority, at least 50% of personality variation is a result of unique environment. So that's like peer group. And so it seems that basically once a child is at school age, a huge amount of their personality and their interests are influenced by their peers more so than their family or home environment. Although there needs to be the caveat that these are twin studies, so it just there are some shared environment factors, so like home life factors that can potentially have more of an influence. So like if there's abuse or trauma going on, then that can cause more variation, but it's less clear on those. But because the other thing that I was thinking of when I was doing it is teenage girls are particularly susceptible to social contagions of the when it comes to sort of mental health things. So multiple personality disorder was one where it would appear in clusters, but also self-harm is one where it appears in clusters, usually in peer groups. Bulimia and other eating disorders, they appear in peer groups, and rapid onset gender dysphoria, that appears to be a social contagion in peer groups. And all of these, the teenage girls are always overrepresented in these social contagion phenomena. And I wonder if, and I don't know, these are speculations that I would have to look into more, but I wonder if maybe there's an element that social contagion for boys takes more the form of risk-taking behavior and antisocial type behavior, whereas for teenage girls it takes more the form of sort of neuroticism and negative behavior, because we know that puberty is the point where sexually dimorphic characteristics or secondary sex characteristics tend to become most apparent, and that's the point where the big average differences between boys and girls become apparent in terms of personality, with girls becoming higher in sensitivity to negative emotion. And so I wonder if either it would be that boys are less sensitive to social contagion, or it would be that the forms of social contagion that boys are vulnerable to differ. And I wonder how much with boys it would be an increase, like drug use would come into that with an increased proclivity for antisocial behavior, and that sort of being subsumed within that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is, I would say that's a fair speculation, in the sense of, when looking at drug use statistics, it does tend to be higher drug addiction and things like that in males than in females. Or I'm not sure if it's drug addiction actually or drug use. Um, but I suppose either way, it'll probably go hand in hand. If there's higher drug use in males, and there'll probably be higher drug addiction as well. But yeah, I would say that's a fair speculation. I didn't have more to say about that, but my mind went blank. So
no, it's fine. What I was trying to get to, although when the things went off in a slightly different direction, but what I was trying to get to is that the criminalization of drugs, the prohibition of drugs, just as with alcohol, because people want to use them, and there are a substantial population that will use them. It's a minority, but it's a substantial minority, will use them regardless of their legal status. There then becomes an incentive for people to provide drugs, because if people are going to use them, there's a profit to be made. And so you quickly develop criminal networks that will fill that void, because, you know, even in places where we don't have free markets, because you know, by prohibiting something, you basically exclude it from the free market. The powers of the market still exist. The sort of laws of supply and demand still exist. So where there is a sufficient demand, someone's going to supply it. And because, in fact, this ties in a little bit to the sociology literature on honor cultures. And I've just connected some dots in my head, so you're gonna have to bear with me as I probably go off on a tangent. You have two comparable cultures, one of honor and one of dignity, and they're named as such because these are the things that grant you social status. So in a dignity culture, dignity is something that's internal to you and cannot be taken away by others, and you have to maintain it. And that tends to emerge in a place where you have consistent, reliable access to legal means of resolving disputes that cannot be resolved interpersonally. But preference is always given to interpersonal resolution. In a honor culture, where these emerge when there is a lack of legal means of resolving disputes, and honor tends to be something that can be detracted from by others. So if someone insults you, that is an insult to your honor. And you know, if you think of like dueling, for example, when people used to duel to resolve disputes, that was an example of honor culture. And you see it in you know, some religious communities where you get like honor killings and things like that because someone is said to have disgraced the family's honor. That might be, I know in Islam that can be if a woman has had sex outside of marriage or something like that, or has disobeyed her family's orders with regards to relationships, then honor kill. That's sort of where we most frequently encounter honor killings. But one of the places that honor cultures emerge within, because the prevailing culture in the West is dignity culture. But one of the places where honor cultures emerge is within gang cultures within the UK, because the criminal nature of their activity and certain cultural views with regards to invoking legal repercussions or invoking the law and the police and so on, that it is not accessible to them, and so they tend to resolve a lot of their problems through violence, because the only way to protect your interests sorry the only way to protect your interests is through means available to you individually um, without invoking the law. So your options then become limited, and people, I think of like child criminal exploitation, which is something I have dealt with a fair bit through work, and how they will deliberately get people in debt to them to enforce a sort of commitment to the business and to generating that profit for them. And then you get when someone steals from someone, or someone does something that offends one's honor or one's business opportunities, the likely repercussion is violence. And a large number of the shootings and stabbings that happen in the UK are related to drugs and the supply of drugs. And so I don't see any way that can fail to emerge in a situation where something with such a high demand as drugs is prohibited.
Yeah, well, I mean, honor culture sounds like a very convenient way of ensuring that people abide by the sort of hierarchy and rules that you want to impose on that basically culture or system, basically, pretty much. Because it's like you get to decide whether they're disrespecting your honor or whatever. So if you're just like, if you do these things that basically piss me off, then I'm allowed to pretty much harm you for however small it is, really. If like basically I take offense to it, if it's affecting my honor, then I can do what I want. So it's definitely very convenient. And like you said, it's obvious that when something's got such a high demand, you're going to have people trying to fill that demand. Like in the book, they say that the experience was, if you take out like 100 drug dealers, then essentially there's going to be hundreds more to take their place. And if you did that all at once, it goes quiet for a few days, and then all of a sudden, all the murder rates start going up, all the violence starts going up, because people are then competing for these areas and trying to basically fill the demand. But at the same time, everyone's fighting, all the different gangs and stuff are fighting over these areas to try and ensure maximum profits. And I mean, it ties into general business world as well. If you look at some of the big companies, like um, what was that one when the pandemic started? It was a competitor with Zoom. It's like House Party or something like that.
Oh, is it not Clubhouse?
I don't know. I can't remember it. I never really used it, but everyone was banging on about it. And then basically, they couldn't provide the evidence for this, but suddenly a smear campaign came out, and they were all just like, they've been getting hacked. People's details are getting leaked. There's no evidence for this, but people just started spreading it on social media. And sure enough, this company ended up going down the shitter because everyone was just like, I'm not using that if my details are going to get leaked. And so it's very similar in the business world. People are going to try and ensure, no matter what. Obviously, they don't go around killing each other, as far as I'm aware, but they might do. um, it's a lot more subtle and tactical. But yeah, they try and take out their competition in whichever means necessary, really, and they ensure that they have got the biggest chunk of the demand that needs supplying, so they can maximize profits. It's going to be anyway. It's just the fact that since it's already illegal, you're going to end up with, like, since drugs are already illegal, you're going to end up with people doing more illegal shit because it doesn't really matter. Like, if you're moving like big weight, if you're moving like kilos of coke, you're already looking at a long prison sentence. So why not fucking start like shooting and stabbing people to ensure that you can make more money from it? Like, it's a dangerous game, basically making anything illegal, because it is gonna hike the price up as well. Like, if it's harder to smuggle drugs into the country and it's not produced already in the country, then you're taking more risk. The supply is going to be smaller, so you can just hike the price up, which means there's more money to be made. And even if these things were legal, you'd have the same sort of thing happening with legal narcotic companies. Like, people would be producing like coke, weed, whatever, um, in a legal manner, but they're going to be competing with other people, so they're going to be sort of doing what they can to try and get an edge over the competition. And yeah.
Yeah, and what you're sort of describing is the evolutionary process, and I've been, because I've read a lot about this recently, and the conclusion I've sort of come to is anything that an evolutionary process is inevitable for anything that exists on a temporal dimension. So if something has to exist across time, and the things that continue to exist across that time span are always going to be the things that are able to, I mean, in the case of evolution on a biological level, it's the genes that are best able to replicate themselves continue to exist, and the genes that are least able to replicate themselves die out.
Yeah.
Obvious, it sort of seems like common sense, although it wasn't common sense, and it took some several feats of scientific genius to come to these realizations. But you have the same thing in the landscape of ideas. The ideas or memes that are able to replicate themselves the best are the ones that survive the longest. And you get it in economics as well. The business that can either continue to refresh and replicate itself and spread, and keep on making itself relevant, will exist for longer, and the one that can't will die out. And the other one is, so they either have to make themselves persistent or replicable across time, or they die out. And one of the interesting what I find to be an interesting case example of what you were describing is the rise of the dark web and websites like Silk Road. Because that was the point at which the illegal trade came to replicate the legal market environment.
Yeah.
And what happened with that was that initially, because it had consumers had a choice of different vendors where they could buy different drugs, that meant that the vendors were then subject to consumer pressure. Whereas if you go to, like, I don't know if you've seen The Wire. I kept thinking of The Wire when I was reading this book, because it's a absolutely great series about the drug trade in Baltimore, in America. But when they were on the corner selling crack, or for example, there was some market competition, but generally every sort of drug dealing gang had their area, and they would fight over the areas. But an addict coming to get their drugs would just get whatever was given to them. But on the dark web, what you had was people had a choice, and people could leave reviews in the same way that they could on Amazon or eBay. And so there was then an incentive for a supplier to drive down their prices to get an edge, or to drive up their quality, or preferably to do both. And that happened for a while. And what you got was a semi self-regulating drug market where consumers were given the best quality and value they could be given for the while the suppliers were making the maximum profit they could without losing that edge for consumers. So there was pressures in both directions. It's how the market works. The issue was that there was no regulating body or means of resolving conflict. So as we spoke about with the sort of honor culture in gangs, there people would use violence and retribution to try and settle issues. Whereas here, because people were operating remotely, they weren't having direct contact with one another. What started to emerge was scammers who would run off with substantial amounts of money and not supply the drugs, or when there would be a fallout with some of them, one of them might publish someone else's details and say this person's this person screwed me over, and make their details available for the police or anyone else to track them down. And it was very hard for the police to track where these websites were coming from. But when they eventually did and they shut down Silk Road, it was like a hydra, right? You cut off one head and then two more emerge.
Yeah.
And what you would get is you would get these long periods of stability where a one of the markets would be in place for a long time and everything would be going well, and the market would operate as it should. And you sort of, like I say, the consumer pressures dictate the quality and the price of the drugs. And then there would either be an issue that gets resolved through the means that were available to them, which weren't legal means and they weren't violent. So it would usually be reputation destruction or sabotage. And then you would get instability emerges from that. Instability emerges every single time the police step in. And then as the markets get more and more diffuse, the pressures get more and more diffuse, and everything lended itself once again to the suppliers. And so drug prices went up, quality went down. It was because people were spread out over loads of different markets, you couldn't get reliable feedback on who was selling what for what quality or what price. And so people were just buying whatever they could. And you went back to this situation where the supplier had all the power. And basically, as far as I can tell, prohibition lends power pretty much exclusively to suppliers at the expense of the customer.
Yeah.
And I know he spoke a lot about this. So you end up, what was really interesting actually was to see that Milton Friedman, who's a very, very well respected economist, who he would describe himself as libertarian, but he quite often gets classed by others as conservative. He really was opposed to the drug war from an economic perspective, and had written quite extensively about it, which I wasn't aware of. I'm aware of Milton Friedman, and I'm aware of the arguments against the drug war, but because decriminalization of drugs is often presented as being something that it's presented as being an issue of the left, not an issue that transcends political boundaries, but actually that was showing that it does transcend political boundaries, because you had this person who's very clearly on the right and a prominent figure on the right for many people, who was basically saying this doesn't make any sense. And I know that Johann Harri in the book spoke about the risk of overdose, and to me that's the thing that was never resolved by a still illegal but free market environment, because you cannot regulate the production. Because say if it was decriminalized and provided in a legal means, one, you could potentially train up the people involved some of the people involved at the lower levels of the illegal trade to become constructive and contributing members of society, and to have a legal income, and reduce the risk of criminalization for them, sorry. But two, you could have quality controls in place, to whatever degree you trust, sort of, administrative bodies who regulate these things. But you could put quality controls in place, because most overdoses come from cutting agents that are mixed to decrease the purity and decrease the price of supply for the drugs themselves, rather than the actual product that's theoretically being sold. So if you have heroin that's cut with brick dust and the brick dust clogs up your veins and causes you to die, it's debatable whether heroin use is the problem there, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Like, um, one, like the people creating these drugs at the minute, whether it's from like cartels or whatever, the purity of them is fucking a lot of them shit, especially with like people trying to manufacture in places like the UK, the people making the MDMA and things like that. And like if you're not a fucking trained what's the word? Chemist, yeah, then you've got very little chance of getting it right. And if the purity's off, then that's already like fairly damaging. If you've got like what 60-70% purity, I know at one point that was the common purity of meth, which you want your drug as pure as possible, really. Um, well, yeah, pretty much. And if if you've got people already making it not very pure, then the probability is more people are going to cut it. It's going to be coming down the levels. Like you get it like wholesale, then it gets spit off, sent to like the street dealer who then sell it in ounces and stuff like that. And it's going to get stepped on a lot of the time, and you just end up with this like next to basically just shit quality drugs. And it's just so ridiculously dangerous for people to be injecting, like, because even the people that are selling to the street dealers, they don't know what's been put in it before. Like, it's already probably been stepped on. So you're adding another potentially harmful chemical or whatever to this already dangerous drug. And it's getting worse and worse and more likely to kill you. So if it does get put into or given to I want to say public hands, but that's probably not, like even private sector creating narcotics and stuff like that. And if it gets put to them and there is quality control, then you can ensure that people are taking pure drugs. And like they did in, I think it's both Portugal and Switzerland, where they have rooms where you're able to safely inject drugs under the eye of um, whoever, like basically a nurse or something.
Yeah.
Um, then you're going to greatly reduce the risk of overdose, because you're not risking overdose, or I wouldn't really call it an overdose if it's something that's not actually part of the drug. So if it's something that's been added to the drug and it clogs, like you said, brick dust clogs up your veins or whatever, and like I wouldn't really call that an overdose, but it probably would still be classified as an overdose. But you're already eliminating that factor. So then if you do take too much of a drug, which realistically in these safe injecting zones, they probably advise you like how much you can take safely with your body weight and your age and things like that. It would be it's just greatly reducing the risk of it, really. And it says in the book it's been proven to have a significant effect on one, HIV cases dropping dramatically because people aren't sharing needles anymore. You've got safe needles, and two, just like overdoses because people are, well, in Portugal they're not taking pure drugs because it's only decriminalized, so it's not actually produced. You still get it from gangs. So
There are a few places though, and I can't remember which countries this was now, where they were prescribing heroin.
Switzerland,
Was that Switzerland?
yeah.
So it seemed you made notes and I haven't. So did the rates drop there as well? What was the impact on public health from prescription?
So Switzerland was completely fucked before they added this. Like, basically, it got to the point where there was just drug addicts everywhere. Like so many people were just fucking addicted to heroin. Like, loads of people were homeless. Um, Gangs were fucking everywhere, basically selling it. People were just like hanging around in kids' parks, like injecting, and not like the rate of, like, say in the UK you'll see this in poorer areas. In Switzerland, this was just everywhere, pretty much. Like, there was such a massive problem with it. Um, and it got to the point where, like, everyone had at least some connection to someone who had um, a drug problem with heroin, pretty much. So it got to the point where drug addicts started gaining sympathy because everyone had a relative or friend who got addicted at some point, and people knew someone who had overdosed. Like, that on every single street, there was at least like one or two, basically. So it was a massive problem, and people started to get sympathy, so they started to push a campaign for legalization, or I don't think it's classified as legalization. It's like,
No, I think it's decriminalization, but they allowed medical professionals to
yeah.
provide prescriptions. If I'm right, you seem to be far more. I mean, the information you just shared there in terms of Switzerland, I'm guessing you've done some reading outside of the book, because I think that goes beyond what was written in the book, does it?
No, no, that was in the book. Uh, to be fair, I'm not sure how similar this version is to the version that you read before, because this one got redone in 20. I can't remember.
Yeah,
Um,
because we both got the new version of the book for Christmas, even though I had a copy of the book and had read it before. And I reread it last weekend. I reread it, but I read the new version. But because I had read it before, I was able to sort of skim through it. So I haven't gone into as much detail. So it's entirely possible I missed bits,
yeah,
but I was able to sort of go through it and be like, oh yeah, I more or less remember this, and to focus my attention more on bits that felt like they warranted it more, if you know what I mean.
yeah, yeah. But like, basically, in the end, obviously the campaign was successful. They started introducing safe injecting areas and putting it on prescription, and yeah, like, within, I can't remember how long. I think they said within like 6 months or something like that. They just saw like a massive drop in people on the streets. They started helping people um, get employed and basically have like a sort of purpose to their life again. And yeah, they found that with a prescription, like, most people stopped using within 3 years. They were expecting people that had like significant problems to get higher and higher doses. They did at the start, and then they usually leveled out within a certain period of time, and then they started to, by choice, reduce their doses. Um, so they slowly decided to come off heroin themselves. And yeah, like, everyone sort of came off the street. Like, well, everyone's definitely a massive
Yeah,
overgeneralization. I'm sure there's still some homeless people there.
yeah.
It's not a miracle cure, but yeah, there was a massive shift in basically the lifestyle. And I think they said that actually, this may be in Vancouver, but I think they said the life expectancy rose significantly as well.
Yeah, because when you were talking, I was thinking how much of this is about Switzerland and how much of it's about Vancouver, because I know that Vancouver. So the first time I read the book 6 or 7 years ago, I found it. I found myself very emotionally invested in the book, because there's lots of personal stories and they talk through their sort of experiences, and it really tugged at the heartstrings to be like to hear first person accounts of the damage that's been done by the war on drugs and its sort of victims, and then this time I had that less, in part because I know what was coming, and in part because I was skimming through it. But there was one story that I found incredibly emotionally moving, which was the story of I can't remember his surname now. He's called Bud something in Vancouver, who was basically a ex-addict who started a campaign for um, better responses to the epidemic of drug issues and overdoses, and HIV and everything like that. And he did lots of sort of public stunts, like creating a sort of memorial in front of the town hall with the crosses to represent the people who died from overdoses, in the same way that we do to remember people who've died from wars. He was doing a similar thing in relation to the drug war. And he basically succeeded in a lot of his lobbying things. And then from then on, when policy was discussed in relation to drug addiction, there was always a representative of drug addicts for the sort of addict community or the drug using community there, so they were able to be involved in those discussions. And yeah, he massively increased the changes he brought about massively increased the life expectancy by like a record amount in a short period of time. And then when he died, all of the politicians and all of the drug addicts and loads of local people came out and basically held a parade in his memory, because of the positive changes that he brought about from basically not being a passive participant in his own story, is the way I read it.
Yeah, yeah, I found it fascinating as well, because you to see such a dramatic shift, and it's not even just in like just like weed smokers or just like recreational drug users. Like we've I'm sure it's probably across the world, but um, we've seen like a massive sort of demonization of anyone who basically is addicted to any sort of drug other than alcohol, pretty much, or nicotine. So anything that's illegal and people get addicted to, we've seen a massive like demonization across them since the start of the war on drugs, I'm assuming.
Mm.
Um, and even now, like I go out in Cork and everyone just calls like the homeless people like junkies and stuff like that, and it's sort of filtering them into a sort of lower class, like they're below the working class. They're like scum, basically. That's how a lot of people see drug addicts, unfortunately. And to read about that and see the fact that there was such a dramatic shift in how people viewed these drug addicts, and even I think it was the mayor of Vancouver, or I don't know how their political structure works over there, but I think it was the mayor. It was said to Buddy, is just like, you've completely like changed my opinion on this, and he like went down to I think it's downtown East Side or something like that.
Am I right in remembering that the mayor was quite conservative, was a Republican, and was very opposed to any drug reforms? Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, he was like he hated it. He wasn't going to any meetings at the start to do with any of this. He was just like, fuck these drug addicts, basically. Like they did war on drugs, blah blah blah, and he was like proper cracking down on it as well. And I think there was like a massive, yeah, that was a point actually. He was cracking down on it, and it's successful for a while, to the point where they literally stopped all heroin getting into, well, I think the majority of heroin getting into Vancouver. So people were injecting basically fake heroin, had
Yeah.
no heroin in it, and they didn't see a drop in drug addiction. They didn't see a drop in drug addict behavior. They were all still injecting this stuff on the streets, and they were still acting in exactly the same way. Um,
Mm.
which then goes to show you that drug addiction isn't purely from the drug itself. Because if that was the case in this dry spell for however many months it was, most of them would have gotten clean, and most of them would have started doing like.
Well, yeah, it sort of counters it counters some aspect of the chemical addiction theory, which is that you become chemically dependent on it. Although chemical dependencies do exist, and so I think it's dangerous to assume that the chemical doesn't play any part. But
Definitely.
that made me think of because with drug taking behavior, almost like all the drugs will affect the dopaminergic systems in the brain to some degree. There's almost always a production of norepinephrine as well, particularly at the points where it's novel and outside of the experience. Because norepinephrine, even in the case, so stimulants will increase the levels of norepinephrine anyway, but even in the case of opiates and stuff like that, it's one of the triggers for the release of norepinephrine is being outside the realms of order, let's say, or the realms of the known. So your body is basically like it doesn't know what to do. It's forced outside of its normal level of functioning. And so the increased level of norepinephrine renders the brain more susceptible to neuroplasticity, and the increased production of dopamine helps to solidify the learning from neuroplasticity when it occurs. So you have the chemical concoction there for effective neuroplasticity, and you see this with phones as well. It is as another sort of point where this happens, where basically you engage in a behavior that releases dopamine, you get a reward for that. That helps to instill learning of that behavior, and so you continue to repeat it, and the more you repeat it, the more strongly wired that becomes in your brain, the stronger the circuitry becomes that tells you to engage in that behavior. So if you've been injecting heroin for a long time, your neurophysiology is going to have adapted to seek that behavior out and assume that as a solution to whatever distress or issue that it's facing. So even in the absence of the drug itself, it's not simply the chemical that's there. There's a neurological wiring for the habituation of that behavior.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's going to be the case in any of these situations, really. Like to assume that drug taking behavior would just stop because the drug isn't there is definitely a leap. But I suppose it really depends on how long. And also it depends what you define as drug taking behavior. When I sort of mentioned it a second ago, I wasn't specifically talking about the actual process of taking the drug. I was also the sort of uh, community behavior, I suppose, in basically areas with high drug addiction. So like people on the street, basically being like, I'm not sure if antisocial is the right way when it's a heroin addict because they're usually sort of slumped over and
Not all the time, and I think that is one of my criticisms of this book is that at some points it's sort of it doesn't entirely do this because it does interview murderers and stuff like that, but there is an element of sort of noble savage type thinking, like the noble addict. There was a degree. I do think he captured the complexity of it to some degree, but I don't think he fully recognized it was sort of like, oh yeah, this person kills people and stuff, but here's his sad background story, and let's talk about how he was impacted by the war on drugs. And I get it because that's that's the purpose of the book, and you have to discriminate between information. You can't just share every single fact possible. But I was like, I feel like his murders are probably slightly skimmed over to paint him as solely a victim. And I think that you can be victim and perpetrator simultaneously, and to suggest that you're solely one or the other is to mischaracterize the situation. And so I think that you can. I think it's reasonable to describe the behaviors that many addicts engage in, including heroin addicts, as antisocial, because they do engage in antisocial behavior. There is a reason for that, and they are victims in some regard, but they're also behaving in an antisocial manner.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the guy that you're talking about, the murderer, I'm assuming you're talking about the guy who crossed over the border to Mexico, and
He's in prison, I think.
yeah, he is the Zazas or something like that. Um,
I can't remember the name.
yeah, he basically joins this cartel, and the thing is, I don't feel like he was sort of glossing that over as him being a victim. In fact, he says there's two different stories to this, like the one where he told in the police interviews and the one that he told
Yeah,
me. And he sort of, I felt it was quite clear that this guy may be just chatting absolute shit. Like, because, I mean, if you're gonna be in that situation, and I don't know, I suppose you could be forced to like, um, well, you can definitely be forced into a situation, especially in cartel life, where it's pretty much just like you either kill people or you die.
yeah,
But I don't think that is particularly painting him as a victim of the drug war. I think there is sort of, I felt it was fairly balanced, but I definitely think it is open to interpretation of being like, oh yeah, this guy just got sort of coerced into the cartel, killed a load of people, and now he's in prison because for his own sort of safety sort of thing. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that it definitely could have been perceived that way. But when I was reading it, I wasn't just like, oh, this guy got lured in by the cartel. Like, poor guy. Like,
yeah.
I
I
was
mean,
sort of like, he made choices, and that's sort of like where he ended up. Because it's not in terms of like drug addiction. He wasn't like a fucking heroin addict and got brought over there and sort of was just like, oh, you're a junkie, so you got to work for me. It's sort of I think I think if drugs were involved, I probably would see him more as a victim purely for the fact that it does affect your decision making.
yeah, and I think, you know, I'm trying to be balanced in that, because I don't think he did like 100% it, but I think there are points in the book where it's like, um perhaps spills to it just leans too far in one direction, and there are a few. So like, there was one bit, I think I messaged you about it. There was one bit that I found frustrating in the way that he was reinterpreting data, because he was drawing massive conclusions from univariate analysis of data when there was clearly much more at play. So he basically said, you know, I think the one that annoyed me most was when he said, "Oh, this predominantly affects black people, even though most well, that this isn't the one that annoyed me the most." He said, "But this predominantly affects black people, even when white people are more likely to be drug users and more likely to be drug dealers." And one, he didn't have the data in it to back it up exactly at that point, um, but I suspect he was using raw numbers of white drug users and white drug dealers versus raw numbers of black drug dealers and black drug users, because I would be curious as to what the rates are of use and dealing relative to their size in the population. And the other thing is that he reduced it to um, drug use. So he just, it was all drugs lumped in together, and I don't think that does it justice, because he was sort of talking about how the police resources were more geared towards black communities, but it was just drug use in general. And I suspect that when you look at the patterns of drug use, that they are very different. So like um, crack cocaine might be more prominent in black communities, whereas cannabis might be more prominent in white communities. It like that's a presumption, but I'm just saying when you just lump all drugs in together, it ruins the analysis because we know that the societal impacts of crack cocaine are significantly more severe than the impacts of cannabis or even powdered cocaine.
All right. Yeah. So I agree with you in some aspects of that lumping all the drugs together probably isn't a good representation of what he's trying to get across. I'm assuming you're talking about when he says that 19% of uh, drug dealers are black compared to, but they make up 64% of the arrests um, in terms of drug dealing. I think is this in Baltimore? I think Baltimore.
But so I can't. Yes, I think it was in Baltimore, um, but I think that the statistics on how many but basically I didn't think it was clear where the statistics are coming from and what percentage of drug dealers they make up because there's no I didn't see a point where is it like here's how we derived this data. It just seemed like a pretty massive assumption.
I think it did say it's like a. Actually, no, I'm thinking I'm getting my sources mixed up here. I can't
Yeah.
remember exactly from the book, but yeah, he basically said that 19% of drug dealers were black, but they made up 74% of the arrests, which I think definitely shows a bias in who they're targeting in terms of basically drug dealers. Um, I'm not sure if this was a. I think it was specific to drug dealers and drug users, but I think there is also an element of who's dealing what drugs. So you're definitely going to get, um, I mean, black or white, you're going to get a significant amount of weed smokers and weed dealers. Like it doesn't really matter, but it does depend on the area. So if it is Baltimore, and I know that Baltimore did have a big issue with crack and heroin, but say if you go to somewhere like Texas, you've got a massive white population that have got meth addictions. So yeah, I forgot where I was going with that.
No, and you're right to point that out because the societal impact of meth use is very, very high. But
Yeah.
the I think, and I'm not saying that it's inherently wrong the point that he's making. My point is that he didn't provide sufficient data to come to that conclusion, and that basically by lumping everything into one variable, he has made the data completely uninterpretable to have any meaning.
See, yeah, I agree with you in the fact that if you're plainly looking at what it says in that sort of paragraph slash chapter, uh, it could definitely look like that. But I personally haven't looked at the sources that he's cited. Like the whole back of the book is filled with sources, so I'm assuming he probably got it from somewhere. So I think that it may just be it could have been written in a better way to try and actually. I suppose that this is the issue when you're writing a book like this. If you go into all the, if you break down statistics in such like a significant way, and you're just like, okay, well, 19% of drug dealers are black, but then you've got a whole 81% that aren't black. Are you then gonna break that down into like African American, not African American, but sort of like Asian, white, fucking Hispanic, um, because obviously uh, Chinese had a massive impact on bringing over like opiates and stuff like that into America, and yeah, I feel like if you start breaking stuff down too much, I think the average user and the person that he's sort of trying to, not user, reader, is the people that he's trying to target basically, may sort of get overwhelmed with the statistics. So I think there's probably reason for simplifying it to the point where the common reader would be able to sort of,
I think I agree. You can't account for absolutely everything in a book that's not aimed at nerdy academics, but but you also have to question if you're losing so much resolution that it becomes meaningless. And one of the things, the example of this that annoyed me the most was he said this number of blacks have been imprisoned for these offences, which is higher than apartheid South Africa, the most white supremacist regime that ever existed. And then in brackets it had, and this many white people, this many whites were imprisoned, and the number of whites was imprisoned for drug offences was higher than the number of blacks in apartheid South Africa as well. And even though it was like disproportionate in terms of the number of blacks compared to whites who were imprisoned was substantially higher, it was so blatantly dishonest to be like, yeah, but compare this to apartheid South Africa, when the pattern was clear that just many more people are imprisoned than in apartheid South Africa.
Yeah, I feel like that would probably work better if he basically used it as like a per capita sort of basis. So like rather than being like, oh, this many people got arrested in South Africa, rather than like, because populations are going to be different. Like it's not, the population isn't going to be one for one. You're right in saying there's definitely a massive, because I think it's something like 1,700 for white and then 4,100.
No, if I remember rightly, from the figure he said it was about 2,800, and I don't know if this was per if it's done per capita, but so I'd have to look back at it, but the figure he gave was like 2,800 blacks imprisoned for such an offence in America versus 850 in apartheid South Africa, and then 950 whites arrested in America for this. And I was like, well, whites are still 100 more than blacks in apartheid South Africa. So and it made the use of the comparison appear hyperbolic.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I feel like the comparison wasn't really necessary to get his point across anyway, to be honest.
No, it was the weakest possible way for him to get that point across because of the way he did it. Is my
Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to get at.
I suppose the danger of it really is that if you're I- when you're writing a book like this, you really don't want to start triggering people's confirmation bias, because as soon as people are so like emotionally invested in a book and they're just like making comparisons like that, then like they start to lose the ability to reason. If your confirmation bias is so strong, you'll start being like, anyone tries to argue against it, you'll just get that emotional response, and you'll try and like fucking uh, I want to say throw your toys out the pram, because that does tend to be what happens with people who have like strong biases, because it doesn't fit with their sort of idea of their reality basically. Um, so it can be dangerous making sort of comparisons like that, because you will start getting people being like, oh, well, you can't say that because all these blacks have been imprisoned. Fucking, there's like way more than like fucking South Africa. I can't remember how to pronounce it.
Apartheid.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, and I mean that what you're talking to there is one of the big sort of points of The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt when he was analysing political discourse, and the sort of he uses the elephant and the rider analogy to say that our intuitions and emotions are this elephant that sort of in control and will go where they want, and the rider is the rationalization that comes after the fact. And really the elephant's in control, and you can do things to sort of tilt it in one direction or another. And when you get people emotionally invested in a subject by appealing to their sort of moral emotions, then rationality, it becomes a significant afterthought, because they are going to be, the elephant is going to be pulling them towards where their emotions are saying this is the right thing. And that's sort of what you're talking about in terms of emotional investment exacerbating the confirmation bias.
Yeah, it's a dangerous game because like as soon as you sort of go down those routes, and I know firsthand like how clouded it can make your judgment.
Oh,
As soon as you
Jeremy
start going down,
Corbyn.
huh?
Oh, Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as you start going down those routes, it's very difficult to sort of see anything else. And this is literally the basis of like the majority of arguments on social media. Like I've seen recently, I know this isn't exactly connected to the book, but I've seen recently there's been a massive divide between men and women because of basically a lot of what Andrew Tate's content being uh, basically sexist, and then on top of that, there's been a lot of podcasts of um, women sort of also spouting sexist stuff. So it's created this sort of thing that everyone's just like, oh well, since Andrew Tate said this, since this girl said this, there's no other explanation for it, and like I now believe this so inherent, I don't know if that's the right word to be fair, so deeply um, that nothing can change my mind. And then there's just a bunch of people on Instagram or like Facebook or TikTok being like, well, I believe this, well, I believe this, and then they're just like, you're a fucking clown because you believe like the opposite to me. And like everyone's just using those clown emojis like all the time, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's genuinely ridiculous. But people can't see past their own sort of bias, and it's pretty fucking scary to see such a divide between so many different like walks of life, basically.
Well, I mean, I see this as an inevitable consequence of the sort of identity politics that's being pushed for years, where it's like if you reduce everyone down to their group identity, you inevitably exacerbate conflict between those groups because that's how people work. And I remember reading about some research by Henry Tarfel. I'm never sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. One day I'll find out how to pronounce his surname. I've got his book here about social identity and intergroup relations. And a lot of his finds, like there was one experiment where if you grouped people, you put a number of dots on a page and you asked people to estimate how many dots there were, and people would guess, and then you would divide them into groups completely at random, but you would tell them one group was people who overestimated and one group was people who underestimated. That didn't have any bearing on what they'd actually guessed because you don't want to bias the experiment that maybe people who think a certain way are more likely to overestimate or underestimate. So they were assessed at random, but told that this is what made them belong to this group. And then they were asked to to complete some tasks that involved dividing resources between the groups. And even though it's completely arbitrary, the group division, people generally gave preference to their own group because they had been told they belonged to that group. And so a lot of the zero sum game identity politics that's been promoted over the recent years has been like, you know, white people are evil oppressors of black people, men are evil oppressors of women. And it's all about privilege and oppression and power, and it reduces all interpersonal relations to these sort of specific dynamics and ignores every other aspect of someone's character. Although I can already hear people who believe in intersectionality saying No, it doesn't, because you have intersectionality and you can be a black woman or a black disabled woman or a black gay disabled woman and so on. But no matter how far you go with that, it will always be insufficient to describing someone unless you can go through a dictionary and find every word that is because even then, if you went through a dictionary and found every single word that described someone, it would be insufficient because people are not one thing and people behave differently in different situations. And so personality is too complex to be reduced to a specific aspect of identity. But these political ideologies reduce everyone to group identity. And there is a time where looking at things by group identity is right, for statistical analysis sake, but generally emphasizing someone's belonging to a group increases the probability of favoritism for that group and conflict with another group. And so this recent emergence of I see a lot of social media content that suggests to me that the decentralization, or I mean, actually, no, that's probably the wrong way to frame it because I'm not convinced that many people in the centralized sort of media structures are free of this issue. But there's a lot of people who've gained platforms that they probably don't deserve in terms of competence in no, that's the wrong way to represent it as well, because they are clearly competent at manipulating algorithms and creating content that appeals to the zeitgeist, and they're able to make themselves popular. So they have a competency in that area. But I see people who do that under the pretense of an intellectualism where they maybe have like a few talking points that they reel out over and over again. And in some ways, it's a good thing that people are trying to do that. But in other ways, there's a bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect where people are overestimating how much they know, and it is causing them to, and then they get followers of people who believe that they know more than they know, and so you get these sort of polarized groups who are following terrible ideas on both sides. And um Andrew Tate was a it's a really interesting case example because my inclination is always to try and look for the value in what someone's saying rather than dismiss them offhand. So I'll listen and I'll go, okay, what's the generous interpretation of this? And I feel like he was misrepresented in many regards. But part of the reason he was misrepresented is because there's like a grain of truth in there in amongst all the chaff, and he's putting it across in such an obnoxious way that it comes across far worse than it is, and he's reducing things. So while there's an element of truth in it, he's not considering all these competing interests, and you basically get the problem of that anyone can support an argument with a very selected number of facts because there are an infinite number of facts in the world, and you need a means of how to discriminate between those. And so I always felt like the discussion around him was just oversimplified drama for the sake of the internet, basically.
Yeah, yeah, I'm definitely inclined to agree with you. I'm not saying I disagree with everything he says, but there's a significant amount of stuff that I disagree with him on.
Yeah, and I feel like that about many human beings.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's just pretty. Yeah, I think it's pretty tragic the trajectory that it's sort of taken. Maybe that's just because I spend enough time on Instagram Reels and stuff like that and YouTube Shorts to basically be targeted by the fucking bullshit that he puts out and the bullshit that other people put out. But so I'm sure there is a whole other side to the internet that I'm not seeing that isn't so fucking grim and do me basically. But
Yeah, I mean, it's the culture wars, isn't it? You know, the culture wars existed with a number of public figures, and that's just been decentralized over time to now you sort of have lower tier celebrities or self-made celebrities who are engaging in them. And it's just changed the whole dynamic. But, you know, I can worry about that sort of thing for a completely different reason. But because I've started this podcast and I have a almost vanishingly small following. You know, I get like I'm only getting at the moment I'm getting something like 40 or 50 views per episode. Yeah. I think the highest one's like 140. So but I always have to question myself of, you know, am I overstating my knowledge in this situation? Am I oversimplifying things? Am I failing to consider the other perspective? Am I every part of what I struggle with or what I dislike in the media environment, I guess. And then I'm like, is that a bit hubristic to think that I even count as being part of the media environment? But yeah, it is something that concerns me. It's something that I feel I have to make a great deal of effort to um, monitor myself to ensure that doesn't happen. And I think I generally manage to navigate that because I am pretty committed to reading and exposing myself to things I disagree with and trying to weigh things against each other. But, you know, I'm far from, I am human with all the flaws and idiosyncrasies that come with that. And I can, you know, sometimes some issues will provoke an emotional response that maybe narrows my vision on a particular topic, or sometimes I say something and then I sort of in the back of my head I'm like, do I really believe that, or have I misrepresented what I believe there and things like that. So it's yeah. My point is that there's a whole other element to this that concerns me that I have to consider because of my unique position.
well, I would say you're not oversimplifying things purely for the fact that you probably would have blown up by now if you kept things simple, because that is what sells at the minute is simplicity to complex situations, because humans don't like to basically look too much into any sort of facts or anything like that. If you're able to simplify a complex problem into like a few sentences for a 10-second TikTok reel, then you're winning really. But it's
And
not.
if you can do that, you're probably wrong.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's the issue with it, but it's how people are making money. So
So to get back on track, the I guess the next important thing that came out of the book, apart from the sort of impact of the war on drugs, was the what he believes was sort of the root causes of addiction.
right,
Um, you're right. It looked
yeah.
like you
Sorry,
just
I was just checking my battery, but my laptop's on like a wobbly thing. So when I put my hand on it, it sort of.
just making sure that the technology is still working. But what did you make of his sort of prognosis in terms of the causes of addiction?
Um, I mean, I wouldn't say any of it is overstretched to what I sort of from what I already sort of knew. So you've obviously got the trauma-related aspect, people having traumatic upbringings, experiencing basically emotionally painful things that they struggle to work through and overcome, especially when you're young, because you don't really have the emotional intelligence to sort of figure things out and process things in a healthy and productive way. And like environment. So basically, if you're living somewhere that's not healthy, I suppose this is still somewhat connected to trauma. But if you're living somewhere that's not healthy and meeting your needs, then you're more than likely going to struggle. And I think this all sort of, I know that we sort of spoke about this briefly before, but it all sort of connects to sort of meaning in life as well. So if you lack meaning, then you're gonna sort of have a existential crisis of why you're alive, what is actually the point of your life. And I'm sure everyone goes to it at one point or another, or fucking several points in my case.
Every week.
Every minute, mate. Um, yeah, I mean, when you don't really see a purpose in life, or when your purpose is literally just to get drunk and high, it's sort of it's a slippery slope where you don't really need meaning when you're high. Basically, like I know plenty of people who their whole teenage to early adult life they just fucking take drugs like all the time because like it's sort of advertised, and well, not advertised as a thing that you should be doing around that age, but in like smaller groups, that is sort of like the sort of social understanding of that's where you're supposed to be, and then that basically turns into their meaning in life is right, I'm gonna drink and take drugs, and when they get to the point where it's damaging them, um, I suppose since they don't have any other meaning in life, it's sort of you either stay addicted to it or you sort of get sober and sort of find a new meaning. But finding a new meaning when you've been doing it for so long is quite like a difficult thing to do. So yeah, that's sort of like my understanding.
Yeah, and I'm glad you sort of drew the connection with meaning, because I think the way he presented it was very much based on connection and sort of relationships, and I think that does play a key point. But I think that the connection and relationships are part of a larger issue of meaning, and I think that um, meaning is something that I would say comes from responsibility largely, you know, and service to others, being so you can find meaning. We discussed a lot of this when we did our episode on Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. But you can find meaning in very difficult situations by committing to service for others. So for him, he wrote about the people who would, within the concentration camps, go around and support others, and how that enabled them to make they were choosing their own path through doing that, even if they were in the minority, and that generally, from his observations, those people lived longer, and that they were happy in doing that, and that they gained something on a spiritual level that was more than their material reality at that point in time. And I know that you know, one of the most effective cures for addiction that has been evidenced has been spiritual transformation. And you know, like it becomes a it's become like at points I've experienced it being a trope that's sort of mocked by people about how ex-addicts tend to find religion. I definitely remember um, having a conversation with someone where they said the worst thing about people giving up drugs is they all find God. Um, and Actually, it's that service of something bigger than yourself. You're part of something bigger. So I guess you can create a connection in that way as someone come up the drive or driven past.
Doodles is just being a barky bastard as usual.
Okay. So you can see connection as connection to the broader world, to society, to humanity, to the earth, however you want to sort of conceptualize that. But when you build up a life for yourself, say if you start working or doing something that's meaningful, like you saw it in some of the stories, like people like Bud, he committed it. He was no longer an addict, but he committed himself to campaigning for the rights of addicts and stuff like that. And in some ways, that's personal to him, but it was in service of others, and he clearly derived a sense of purpose and meaning from that because
Yeah.
it was bigger than himself. And you see it when people, like, I've had loads of times where I work with teenagers who are depressed and anxious and not really sort of doing anything. Their lives are mostly characterized by immediate gratification, whether it's drinking or smoking or hanging out with their friends, or sex or whatever. There's no responsibility within it. And it's very much all done on a whim. And then you support them to enroll in college and do something that they find interesting, or to get a job. And even work in warehouses, like I can apply this to myself. Working in a warehouse was always, I mean, I hated it, but it was always better for my mental health than not working, because I was part of something, I was doing something, I was contributing. There was some structure and purpose to my week and to my days. And that, one of the biggest issues for people who get themselves clean from drugs and stop using, one of the biggest causes of relapse is that all of their social networks and all of their life is oriented around that. And so they basically get sober and go, well, what now? What do I do? And that lack of orienting purpose just leaves them vulnerable to relapse, because they haven't got a way to navigate away from it.
Yeah, I mean, like I can say that from first-hand experience. Like when I was trying to get sober, and I basically pretty much ended up just getting isolated from like all my friends and things like that. And it was then whenever I'd see everyone and they'd be drinking, and I'd be like, ah, fuck's sake, like how am I going to navigate this? And most of the time I'd just end up drinking again because like it. I'm happy being sober because I didn't have anything to sort of other than my mental health, I didn't have anything to sort of any reason to sort of get sober. So it was sort of just like, well, I'm not depressed when I'm drunk, but I'm depressed when I'm not drunk. So like, it's sort of it's a very double-edged sword. Um, it's interesting that I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I can't remember who it was with. I think it was on like Psychology Day or something like that. Actually, no, I think it was a really old Modern Wisdom podcast, and they basically are talking about how to find meaning. And um, the guy that was on there was basically saying um, you can find meaning in like so many different ways. Like people find meaning in like work, people find meaning in communities, people find meaning in like giving and helping and so on and so forth. But a lot of people who found meaning that revolved around materialistic things. So basically, if your meaning was running a business, um, and then basically your meaning was directly correlated to how well that business was doing. Um, and essentially, what they found is most people that didn't have meaning that was related to a community, where they had purpose within the community, whether that community was solely based around close family or whether that community was like friends and stuff like that as well. Um, Anyone who their meaning wasn't substantially orientated around that, it wouldn't hold up for very long. So like you would push yourself and push yourself to build this business. Your whole meaning was around it. You get to a point where you thought you'd be happy, and then you're just like shit. Like I'm not happy. Like my purpose here is like pretty superficial, basically, and people would um people would end up in very dark spots. Often ended up getting addicted to things like alcohol, or in America, a lot of like oxy and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's evident that the most important type of meaning is meaning within community, and that's, I suppose, that's kind of obvious if you think about how social like humans are, and um, obviously the tribal instinct and stuff like that. Like way back when, before technology and everything like that, you would need to have meaning within your tribe. You'd go out hunting, or you'd foraging, or whatever, or you'd stay looking after kids and uh, making clothes, whatever. I don't actually know what they did other than that, but um, yeah, it's sort of it makes a lot of sense that we need meaning. We need to be meaningful to other people, I suppose. Like if we're not meaningful to other people, if then we're not really going to be happy, basically.
Well, so what I was thinking of as you were saying that is another connecting dots moment. So the serotonin systems in our brain are evolved to track social status. And we know this from Jordan Peterson famously highlighted this in lobsters having similar serotonergic systems in their brain that track social status, and his detractors have generally made their own ignorance fairly clear on a regular basis by going, what have lobsters got to do with humans? Evidencing that they completely missed the point. But we've also seen that we've also done research on primates that's shown the same thing, and much closer genetic ancestors, because I think lobsters we separated from a common ancestor hundreds of millions of years ago, but primates is a lot more recent. And so you increase the production of serotonin relevant to how high you are in a social hierarchy, and being low in a social hierarchy decreases it, obviously. And SSRIs, serotonin selective uptake reinhib so serotonin selective reuptake inhibitors, or one of the most common sort of forms of antidepressants, work by decreasing the rate at which serotonin is absorbed, so there's greater level of serotonin residually in the system at all times. So you get it mimics having higher levels of serotonin production, and it works really well on other animals that are depressed, because it gives the illusion of having moved up the social hierarchy. But if you do nothing to materially change your circumstance, then it's basically just putting a plaster on something that eventually has to come off. You take the drugs forever, or you go back to being depressed. But what you're talking about in terms of sort of focus on material success rather than a success in the form of service to others or in relation to others.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, if you are materially successful, but nothing about your character or your social environment changes, then there's no reason why your serotonergic systems would increase your social positioning, your self perception of your social positioning. So there has to be a social element to it for your neurophysiology to reward you for increased social status. There is a degree to which material wealth will satisfy that, and
Yeah.
material wealth can be a proxy, but material wealth is fundamentally a proxy for competence. And so if you want to move up a social hierarchy, one of the best ways you can do that is competence. But if you are not behaving and engaging in a way that people think that they want you around or rely on you more, or you're of greater social value to them, then that proxy is actually a false indicator, you know. So say someone who has inherited wealth and is able to obtain material items that would be indicative of competence in a meritocratic environment, they might still be an undesirable person to have around. So they're not going to be able to fool their neurophysiology into saying, I am socially competent. They might, perhaps they don't become as depressed as if they didn't have the material items as well, but they're not demonstrating to themselves that they hold any position in a social hierarchy.
Do you think that a hierarchy is the right way to put it in terms of meaning? Because you don't need to be above your community, however big or small, um, to have meaning to the community. So like everyone on every level has, well, in theory, in a productive community, everyone at every level has some sort of meaning. And whether they are a significant role player on how the community basically works or not, I suppose my idea of it would be that they would, since they still have meaning within that community, they'll be less likely to get depressed, less likely to sort of hide from their demons in a sense. Do you know what I mean?
So yeah, I know what you mean. My first point would be to say that a hierarchy doesn't imply being above the community. The hierarchy can exist within the community.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify that. But also, do you think your criticism is how human societies play out? Because
No, not entirely. But I mean, like, obviously the hierarchy is within the community. Like that is sort of what I was referring to. But
yeah,
I mean, like, even in any hierarchy, there's going to be people above and below. I'm just saying that the people at the bottom, since they still have meaning within the community, um, would. But then I suppose if you're putting it on that in that sense, then everyone should have meaning because everyone's playing a role in the bigger community that is whatever country you're in the fucking government and paying your taxes and
yeah.
so on and so forth.
And so let me give you an example, and I go back to the warehouse example because of all my years spent working in warehouses. It's easy to talk about. So those of us who are at the bottom rung of the ladder, who are working on the warehouse floor for low wages, doing repetitive manual labor, the formal hierarchy, we're at the absolute bottom. But amongst those people at the bottom, there were those who recognized they were part of a joint endeavor and contributing something. And so they were less likely to complain. They were less likely to be disgruntled. They were more pleasant to be around. And there's a point where people didn't like that as well. No one likes a complete job's worth, but that's and then you also had people who were really miserable and cynical and complained about everything, and they were probably less likely to pull their weight. So there's a social hierarchy that develops within that, because the people who are hardworking don't complain too much and only complain when it's warranted, but also maintain an attitude that makes them more enjoyable to be around and have the social skills and the team ethic to be enjoyable to be around, because they are more desirable to be around to others who are on the same formal rung of the ladder. They are elevated in social status compared to those who are unreliable, who aren't working properly, who are difficult and antisocial, and who no one wants to be around. So there's always a social hierarchy within that, and I don't see any way where you could not have a social hierarchy. And I spent years dealing with the self-described anarchists who committed a significant amount of energy to at least voicing their opposition to hierarchy, but there was still hierarchies all over the place in everything they did. It's not that they got rid of them, it's just that they refused to acknowledge them.
Yeah, so what I kind of get from that in that sense is that it really depends how much value you can take from the meaning that you can have in your given moment. So, like, you can, I suppose it comes back to that sort of every cloud has a silver lining sort of thing. Is no matter what sort of situation that you're in, um, as long as you're actually in some form of community, then you can probably find some sort of meaning within that. And it's whether you're able to recognize that and whether you're able to actually apply value to it. Because if you're cynical and if you sort of don't see the meaning behind working in a warehouse, which in all fairness, I don't blame them. Because I spent plenty of time fucking working for people and not finding meaning in it at all. Then you're basically more likely to pretty much be depressed. So I suppose it depends. Does the meaning fit in with your personal values?
Yeah, and there's definitely an element of needing to find your niche and the place you fit in. But I would ask you this: do you think that in those jobs that you're thinking of, where you say you couldn't find meaning in it, do you think that you couldn't find meaning in it because of your attitude, or your attitude was because you couldn't find meaning in it?
Um, I think it varied, to be fair.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely points where I couldn't find meaning in it, so I turned into a grumpy shit, and then definitely couldn't find meaning in it from there. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think that to be fair, I think a lot of it is actually to do with the fact that I sort of expected myself to be able to do better than sort of do like customer service and things like that. Like I always sort of had high expectations of myself, and so did people around me. So I was sort of like, I don't know, sort of disgruntled in the sense that I didn't think I should be doing customer service tickets and
So let
shit like that.
let me reframe that slightly, because you also, you spent a lot of your life trying to do get rich quick schemes, and one of the things that we've discussed in recent years is that you learned that there isn't actually a shortcut to success, and hard work is the key.
Unfortunately,
Yeah, unfortunately, if you aren't prepared to work hard, you don't get the rewards of hard work. Um,
fucking capitalism.
it's just existence, mate. Before capitalism, if you weren't willing to plough the fields all day, you starved to death. So, capitalism's given you a lot more choice as to where you commit your work efforts. but what you're talking about there is you viewed yourself as above that position, and so you viewed yourself as entitled to more. You felt like you should be doing something more, so you viewed yourself as above the position that you were in. And can you imagine if you, I don't know if you can think of a situation like this. I can certainly think of some where I worked alongside people who were not managers but believed themselves to be and acted as if they were, for example. And that's not quite what you were doing, but it's an example of someone who believes themselves to be above the position they're in. And they're generally quite unpopular within a team because it's insulting to other people, isn't it? If someone comes in and says I don't think this job's worth much, I'm better than this, then what are you saying about the people who are working the job? You're saying I'm better than you, and that people don't like that.
Yeah.
And it's all implied. You're not explicitly saying this. I know you don't explicitly act like this, but so I would say your attitude in that regard probably meant that you had an adversarial relationship with the job, and you were probably less pleasant to be around. And there was an element of like what we were talking about with the material reality. There was an element of self-deception there where you were saying my social status should be higher than this, I'm lower than I am, so that is going to affect your internal regulation of self-perceived social status.
Yeah, I mean,
And don't get me wrong, there are environments that are just pathological through and through. And I've worked in teams because I used to come with a similar chip on my shoulder and entitled worldview where I was like, I deserve more, I'm capable of more, this is rubbish, I don't want to be doing this. And generally it made me unhappy, and I can imagine it was difficult for other people to deal with because I still look on that with empathy, but I encounter people who are like it now. I'm a bit older and and much practice gratitude for my position a lot more. But I just think, God, it's exhausting to listen to this all the time. And I think think about your friends. I'm not going to name people, but I know within your social circle you have people who are maybe will sit there and say, I deserve more from the world, but I'm not going to do anything to get it because I should just have it. And those people are much
yeah.
harder to be around, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, like the way I sort of dealt with it, that was more coming from like a self-reflection from now. It wasn't like at the point I was just like, I'm better than this. I think that's how I
Yeah.
sort of felt. And after looking back at it, but the way I sort of dealt with it was um, I was sort of just like, ah, fuck this. Like, I wasn't negative. What I did was I just fucked about, and I just like, I laughed with people, and I didn't take my work overly seriously. I just sort of, I just sort of always sort of expected that something better would sort of come along at some point, and I'd push myself when I need to push myself, sort of thing, which never really came around until like the past like year or so.
Until you realise the best time to push yourself is now. Always.
Yeah, yeah. If only I had that realization 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, but
Well,
yeah, I sort of I dealt with it in a sort of I don't think I was ever really too difficult to be around. When I was in work, I wasn't sat there depressed and stuff like that. There was definitely some people that didn't like me more for the fact that I'd take the piss all the time. Like
yeah.
it was someone that I worked with who was from Mauritius. Uh, Me and him used to just be racist to each other all the time, just like joking around,
Yeah.
not in a rude way or anything. Is He was calling me like white chocolate and stuff like that, and yeah, and basically like other people sort of started taking offense to it, and I was just like, oh. Yeah, it was sort of like that environment. I got along with the people that I interacted directly with. I got along with, but the people around me like sort of saw me as a immature little boy who. Well, in fact, one time when I said that I was planning on looking into mortgage advising, this guy turned around and was like, "I'd never buy a mortgage from you." So
Fair
yeah,
point.
Yeah, I mean, each their own, and I probably wouldn't either.
But yeah, so we got somewhat waylaid in the details of personal life, but I think there is something to that in terms of so. Actually, no, I think it warrants further exploration because I think you probably had people like the fact that you could joke and get along with people probably actually added to your social status to some degree. And if you couldn't get along with people and you weren't taking the work seriously, then that would have been a far greater issue. But if you look back on that now, do you think if you maybe took the work a bit more seriously and had both those elements to your personality and were able to bring them out at more appropriate times, so you joked when it was appropriate and you worked hard when it was appropriate, and you could build those social relationships and be a committed member of the team, what that surely would have elevated your probabilities of progression and obtaining something from it.
I mean, it was more. I think one of the big factors of where sort of my depression came in like hard. Obviously, I had a coke addiction. So that was probably one of the biggest factors. But
It doesn't help.
in terms of work, I actually tried to make the leap from where I was into something that was more money orientated. And when I sort of had my trial shifts and stuff like that at recruitment consultancies, um, and I started getting interest in working for these people. I sat there and I was like doing my trial shifts and I was like, ah, oh, this is fucking dire. Like this isn't what I really want. Um, so yeah, it's sort of I was promised a lot of things from the companies that I work for. I kind of went off on a sidetrack then. Uh, I was promised a lot of things at the company I worked for. They were looking at turning me into a software developer. But all the courses they're just like, oh yeah, you can have like a 1 day course and things like that. And they're promising like full training for it. And as oh yeah, you can pick one course that you want to do for like a day and we'll pay for it. And it's like, that's not really going to turn me into a software developer, is it? And they're just like, yeah, we need more commitment from you. And I was just like, well, it kind of works both ways, really. And I think that like, I tried to make that leap because I wasn't getting given what I needed to sort of progress. And I was sort of bottom of the pile in the software uh, engineering area. And then yeah, sort of figured that what I thought I wanted and what I thought my meaning was wasn't actually what my meaning was. It didn't align with my values or anything like that. So yeah, I mean probably being more work orientated would have been a good thing for both the companies and myself. But I suppose it was all the coping mechanism really. It was just yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And because I think like so another way of framing it is basically if you want to drugs fill a purpose in your life, don't they? And if you want to stop using drugs, you have to find something that fills that place in your life instead. And I think like so I haven't had any alcohol for about 8 months now, 7 or 8 months, and I always had a sort of like binge drinky relationship with alcohol. Like once I started drinking, I found it hard to stop, and so I just would quite frequently end up with hangovers. I'd spend more money than I wanted to. I'd end up with hangovers that like floored me for the day and things like that. And I just thought to myself one day, I thought, there's got to be better uses of my time than this, you know, like I've got to like there's got to be something that I can get more about. And you know, I've stopped drinking many times before and then start again, and it's always repeats the same patterns. And actually, I've found giving up quite easy. And the reason I think that is because I basically filled the time that I would and put the money that I would be using for drinking towards other things. And now when I think about the probability, if I think about using alcohol or something like that, I just think to myself, but that's going to impact on all these other things I want to do. So I have something better to do, something that I care about more and that provides me with more on a spiritual level. Um, you know, I mean, today's Sunday, so today would probably be hangover day. But I'm like, actually, even though I'm currently not able to exercise or anything like that, I'm like, well, I could spend my Sunday, I could record this podcast episode, I could get some editing done, I could read some books, and those things are of more value to me than drinking. So I no longer feel like it's not a question that I have to battle with. It's a question that's answered straight away because I'm like, well, I could drink, and I'm like, but that'll just get in the way of everything else I want to do.
Yeah, it's definitely yeah, I found that was basically pretty much a similar reason why I sort of gave up as well. Um, Other than the fact that like addiction was just sort of destroying my body and everything else. But I sort of got to a point where I was like, right, I've known that I'm able to sort of actually do something with my life for a significant amount of time, but I haven't felt enough of a need to sort of make the changes to do it. So like since after I started trading, I was like, right, this is something that I know that I can be good at. Um, so if I'm drinking all the time, like when I first started trading, I was taking notes, but I was smoking weed every day. So like I'd take notes until like all morning, and then I'd have a smoke at like 2, and I'd smoke it for the rest of the day. And I did that for a few months, and when I gave up smoking, I looked back over my notes and I was like, none of this makes sense. Like literally none of it makes sense. I was like, there's so many missing bits to this. They're just like it was absolute fucking gibberish. And I was just like, all right, this is something that means I need to get sober. And I battled with it for a while, but I can take or leave like drink and stuff now. I don't really fall into the habit of doing it. And same as smoking. So
Yeah, and that to me is just embodies everything we've been saying, and is that when there's a higher purpose to your life, then giving up becomes significantly easier, and it's only in the absence of a better source of meaning that drugs become the appealing option.
yeah, pretty much. And I suppose it also ties in with the fact that most people aren't going to have meaning when they're a fucking teenager. Like, yeah, that's not sort of obviously you're figuring out the world and that. So, especially if you've got a traumatic background and you're a teenager, you're trying to find meaning, but you don't actually know what meaning is, and you don't actually understand finding meaning, but it's sort of something that we all do. And then drugs are just an easy sort of solution to that void. And then you just need to find out the hard way later on that it's not a good meaning to your life.
So, um, one last thing that I sort of forgot to question earlier, and it's just popped into my mind again. So the reason I laid out those four different groups of there's people who are going to take drugs regardless of the law and people who aren't going to take drugs regardless of the law. And I think those two groups make up the vast majority. But then there's the people who are the law is the biggest affecting factor, um, which is people who might take drugs but don't because it's illegal, and people who do take drugs because it being illegal appeals to them. One of the big sort of concerns that people raise about the idea of decriminalizing or even legalizing drugs is that it would increase the rates of use. And I'm curious as to what you make of that.
So I don't have any statistics to back it up outside of what's in the book already, but
Yeah.
basically, from what they say in the book, is that there's usually a short increase of drug use, and then it sort of levels out. It's the same with like weed when it got legalized in like California and stuff like that. Same with the end of it is California, isn't it? Yeah. Same with prohibition. When that ended, like more people started drinking. And yeah, it's sort of another thing that they mention is the fact that a lot of the statistics of spikes of drug use when drugs got decriminalized in Portugal and Switzerland um, was that they don't factor in alcohol consumption as a drug. So most of that spike when it gets legalized is going to be from people stopping using alcohol and starting using the drug, or basically using them intertwined, pretty much like sometimes drinking, sometimes taking the drug. And so realistically, if you classify alcohol as a drug, there's not actually a spike in drug users. It's just a diversification of what people are sort of using. And I think that realistically, that diversification could have significant benefits on society, especially when it starts coming into realms of like psychedelics, because it definitely like I don't know many people that started taking drugs that didn't have a shift in mindset that made them develop more sort of like open-mindedness and like empathy and understanding. Some of them are still cunts, but like a lot of people, like I know some people that were absolute little shits and then started smoking weed and like doing mushrooms, and now they're like some of the nicest people I know. And I think that diversification of substances that we can ingest, especially ones that aren't going to start increasing like people fighting like alcohol does and violent fucking crimes. Don't like you're not really going to hear
I was
what.
gonna say, it's about 50% of violent crimes involve alcohol, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's ridiculous. I read something in the news the other day where some electrician in London got really drunk, and there's this like 52-year-old banker who was just walking down the street after uh, getting a cab for their mate, and they're walking down the road. The electrician just comes out of nowhere. Basically, the banker had his phone in his hand. Electrician thinks that's his mate's phone, and just goes up to him and starts fucking punching him. The guy like falls to the ground, like hits his head. Electrician takes his phone, so that's my fucking friend's phone, blah blah blah. Ends up killing the banker, and turns out it wasn't even his mate's phone. And it's just like
Yeah.
if more like especially with domestic violence as well. So much of domestic violence is related to fucking alcohol. You're not really well. You may get some people getting fucking tripping on like acid or mushrooms or whatever, and then beating their significant other for some reason or another. But the probability of it is a lot a lot less, in my opinion. Anyway, I don't have the statistics to back it up. I
Yeah.
guess it'd be a trial and error thing, but
Well, I think that part of the issue from my perspective, because I this is something that I've wrestled with a fair bit, because I've wondered, because I've always sort of been an advocate for the decriminalisation of drugs, although often that was done from a position of self-interested naivety. But the concern about other people, about any increase in drug use, it may happen. It may happen, and I think of the sort of famous Thomas Sowell quote where he says, there are no solutions, there's only trade-offs. And I think that
yeah,
a slight spike, or a spike in drug use that consists of far safer drugs and more regulated drugs than we have now, that also takes the drug market out of the hands of the criminals, and allows economical growth, seems like it's probably worth that trade-off, because I think that we can make the drug use far safer. We can educate people better on how to use it. But I was also thinking, as you were talking, like, there may be other positives that we don't really know that we're missing out on. I think of like the work of Roland Griffiths researching the use of psilocybin in therapy, and the sort of benefits that have been found in the research on that so far. And I'm like, one of the big reasons why that research has never been conducted properly is due to it being illegal, and the issues with ethics boards and so on and so forth. And I don't think those issues would entirely go away if something was decriminalized, but we may be able to do more research on it and therefore have a clearer picture about what the social impacts of and be they positive or negative. If we were able to do more research into them more easily, we might know what the variables are in this problem that we're trying to resolve. You know, we'd be in a far better position to have the debate on decriminalization or criminalization if we had been able to do all of the necessary research to understand the impacts of the drugs that have been criminalized for as long as they have.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think a massive part of it is just the lack of information at the minute. And if the general public were properly informed at the start, rather than with this propaganda shit, I think the drug war would probably, well, there probably wouldn't be a drug war, and also it'd look incredibly different, like from the societal impacts of drugs would be incredibly different to how they are now. But at the same time, I think good luck taking the fucking drug money away from the fucking cartels and shit without that being a kickback. No?
Well, that's where the corruption comes from, doesn't it? They're protecting their interests, and there will be substantial influence, I'm sure, on policy makers and politicians, that is probably greater than we would like to acknowledge a lot of the time, because there's so much money in it. You know, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and people are going to want to protect that. So it's not an easy issue to address now. But what are you going to do? Nothing. Most societal issues are difficult to address and involve a lot of hard work and consideration. So
we're doing our bit, mate. We're making a podcast on it. That's all we can do.
Yeah, hopefully we'll convince 4 people who are probably already vaguely in agreement to.
I'm sure Mum and Dad will agree. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, that seems like a good place to end it anyway.
Yeah.
And now we'll need to find another book.